In 2004, we had 400 British troops in Afghanistan, in the north, in Mazar-e-Sharif. We were facing a very different set of circumstances there. And every single time there's been an urgent operational requirement in Afghanistan, which is why we're spending £5 billion there this year. We do so to support our troops. But there is a bigger point to this, which is important for all three of us, because I think we'll agree on it. However much we work on this, and every government, including this one, works to ensure that we have the best equipped troops, this war in Afghanistan requires our soldiers to go into the towns and villages of Afghanistan, and it requires them to engage with the local population. That is the only way to win a counterinsurgency. So however much I would like to be able to say to you today, I can guarantee that soldiers will be beyond danger, I can't do that. Because this requires us to get those soldiers on the ground, in the towns and villages of Afghanistan, to engage and protect the local population.
Surely, of course that is right about the work of the individual soldiers, but isn't it time also to accept that cutting the helicopter procurement budget in 2004 by £1.5 billion was a mistake? Jeff Hoon at the Chilcot Inquiry, one of your former colleagues, has said that if that hadn't been done, those helicopters would have been coming on stream now. And that is why I think we do need a true National Security Council, because I think a committee of the Cabinet with the Armed Forces chiefs, with the intelligence services, all there together, would not make such a foolish decision as that.
It's William Hague, foolish decisions. Were you right to make a political football out of Afghanistan? Would you welcome it if senior serving officers took their complaints about a Conservative government's policy to the opposition and they were exploited in the way you exploited some of the criticisms of the government?
I don't think it would be fair to say we've made a political football out of Afghanistan. We have been supportive but not uncritical. Where we have thought for a long time that there weren't sufficient helicopters, we have said so. But we do support the overall strategy and objectives. I think there is a good deal of consensus about that. We support the objectives of the London conference that David Miliband played a big role in January, and we want to give that strategy time and support to succeed. Okay. So there's no question of a political football here.
David, your party originally, unlike Iraq, which you were against, you supported the original deployment in Afghanistan. But are you now trying to distance yourself from this policy? Are you still in favour of the deployment?
Yes, we are. The biggest mistake in Afghanistan was actually going into Iraq, which you mentioned. When the Labour Party had their Strategic Defence Review in 1997, the military and defence spending was built upon the army going to have one war, not two. And so the decision to go into war in Iraq when we hadn't finished the job in Afghanistan was bad for many reasons. It was against international law in our view. There was no real evidence of weapons of mass destruction. They could have left the UN weapons inspectors there for a long time. But also, it overstretched the British Army. It meant that Afghanistan could not be dealt with fully. And I believe if we had not gone into that disastrous war in Iraq, we'd not be in Afghanistan now.
But you support government policy on Afghanistan? You would stay the course in Afghanistan if it was your decision?
Yes, we would. We looked at this very closely because we were concerned that the government and indeed the Americans were pursuing a military-only strategy. And Nick Clegg did break the consensus on this last year because we argued that there needed to be a political strategy as well. You're never going to solve Afghanistan simply by fighting. So we argued you need a political strategy at various levels, at an international level, to bring in other countries in the region, like India, like Pakistan, like Iran, like Russia. We argued that. We argued that we needed a much stronger government in Kabul. We needed to make sure President Karzai got rid of the corruption. And we also argued that at the local level, we needed to engage with the Afghan insurgents, because many of them aren't extreme Taliban, that they're local Pashtun farmers who, frankly, have always fought foreigners. They call them the Ferengi. And therefore, they were doing what comes naturally to them. And we believe we needed a political solution to engage with those people.
In terms of what comes naturally to your party, the manifesto contains a phrase about critical support for the Afghan mission. Now, that seems to be, if I may say so, a rather meaningless phrase. Either you do what President Obama does, and you are frank, for example, with President Karzai about his shortcomings, or you speak out in ways that might be damaging to the morale of British troops or to the command of NATO commanders.
Not at all. We've been very strong in our support for the British troops. They do a fantastic job for this country, and I think all three of us will agree we have got complete admiration for what they do. to. But it's right for an opposition party, hopefully soon to be a party of government, to be critical of the Afghan strategy. We were last year because it didn't have that political...
What kind of things would you say that were different to the sort of reservations that Gordon Brown or Barack Obama have had about, for example, the Afghan elections? How would your policy actually be different? Because the phrase seems to me to be quite meaningless.
Well, let's give you a classic example at the moment. President Karzai is being criticised by a number of people, including President Obama. You're right about that. But at the moment, he doesn't appear to be listening. He still seems to be going about his old ways. And
so what would you do?
Well, I think we may have to go round President Karzai, work with local village leaders, with local tribal leaders, if President Karzai won't mend his ways. We've got to make it clear to Karzai.
Is that realistic, David Miliband?
Look, you can't ignore the president of the country. I mean, he's been elected president of Afghanistan despite the difficulties.
Kind of.
Well, he got the most votes. That no one disputes that. But we certainly need to pursue the political settlement that I have outlined and that the Prime Minister has created. Everybody knows...
What if he continues in his corrupt ways?
We don't pay a single penny of British aid to Afghan institutions unless we're absolutely convinced it will reach...
But our soldiers are there.
No, I'm sorry. We've got documented independently that not a penny of British aid does not reach the people it's intended for, and we will not pay a penny to corrupt departments or corrupt parts of the Afghan government. And it's quite wrong to give any suggestion that somehow British aid is not reaching the people that it is intended for.
This will be a crucial year in Afghanistan.
I need to move on, William Hague, but I'm coming to you on this. We're going to look now at terror and security. Isn't it about time, Mr. Hague, that we put political correctness aside and profile those most likely to commit terrorist offences against us?
Well, I think we should take the advice of that about our security services. That is exactly the sort of thing that a National Security Council can look at.
Haven't you got a view on it?
Well, no, because I think that is necessary to all look at together and look at...
You haven't got a view on this issue?
I'm not going to take a view about how precisely you deal with people passing through our airports, and unless I was in government with all the advice of the airport authorities and the intelligence services and everybody else. And there may well be a case for what you say, but we should make that decision with all the information available to us in government.
It's not just a technical decision. If you were to do this, it's a highly controversial political decision.
And that's why I'm not accepting your invitation to make it off the cuff. I would want all the proper advice about it in order to make that decision. We have to improve our border security, of course we do. That is why we want a dedicated border police that the government say they have created, but they've rebadged various agencies. That's all they've done about it. We want a proper, dedicated border police, but how they operate, well, that is up to working with them and other police forces and the security services.
You've talked about taking their advice, but you've got a manifesto commitment to ban Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an extreme party in some ways, but it certainly insists it's a non-violent party. Now, the advice of the agencies is not to ban that party. Why do you favour that? Because it seems to violate the principle you've just set out, and perhaps to be bowing to some sort of Islamophobia.
It's certainly not part of it. I don't think we can be accused of Islamophobia. We think that is in line with commitments this country has made. We're not the only ones to say it should be banned. I believe Tony Blair in the past said it should be banned, and then the government decided, for many reasons, not to do it. But given that commitment was made, clearly the former Prime Minister thought it was possible to do that, we should be able to do that.
Davy, your party's manifesto wants to scrap ID cards, biometric passports, the Intercept modernisation programme, regulate CCTV, reduce the maximum period of pre-charge detention to 14 days, all of which, in the view of professionals, would hinder the fight against terrorism. Why do you put civil liberties for the few above the security of the many?
We don't. Let me explain our position. We have supported the Liberal Democrats almost every counter-terrorist measure that's been put forward. They've gone through Parliament mostly on a cross-party basis. Indeed, Liberal Democrats have proposed, and the government have adopted our proposals in a number of areas, to make stiffer and tougher proposals on counter-terrorism. I'll give you an example. Post-charge questioning, a new offence for making preparations for terrorist acts. So Liberal Democrats have played a role in getting tougher on the terrorist threat. But
have you felt that, Mr. Miliband? Have you felt that you've had the support of the Lib Dems?
Well, I think it would be very unwise to roll back the security measures that we have in place. But we have a very, very clear view. We have a responsibility to uphold our national security, and we have a responsibility to uphold our deepest values. And there will be no compromise with the Labour government, either on our national security or on our deepest values. Now, in respect of William's point, look, I've been there. This racial profiling issue is not the way to tackle terrorism. You tackle terrorism one person at a time, one group at a time, making the links. And when they do come in through airports in the way that you describe, you use your intelligence to target them. Racial profiling or religious
Why do you describe
profiling.
it as racial profiling?
Well, you did in your introduction. And racial profiling or religious profiling is not the right way to do this.
Actually, I don't think Andrew did say racial profiling.
I did not say racial profiling. I talked about profiling.
And that may well be the right conclusion. But I think, as you said, you've been there. We haven't yet been there in the other parties. And we should have access to the same information and advice.
Take it from me. You do it person by person, group by group, link by link. That is the right way to map out the chain of terrorism that does link us to other parts of the world.
David's right that sometimes you do need an intelligence-led approach, and we need to work with our partners